Middle March today. Still in search of spring. Not finding a ton of it yet this year. More rain came recently. Hopefully higher where it has been wetter. And these low barren valleys, there'll be more going on. Even though it's still a bit early in the season for higher up stuff. I've seen Astragalus in March blooming at 8,000 feet before, for example, so it's not out of the realm of possibility. You can see some of that new precip on the spring mountains there. Further west is Death Valley. And the telescopic one. Yeah, I'm finding spring high up in this wash. Lots of prunus and Eriogonum. Bahiopsis, all starting to leaf out up here. Ambrosia still leafing out interminably. Lepidium as well. That's all to say that lower down on the other side, I hope we're actually finding things in flower again. And by again, I mean since last season, of course. Stuff greening up on the hillsides too, also a good sign, though not as lushly, if you can call it that. And Wersches here. Here on the periphery of Ash Meadows, periphery of Death Valley, in the Devil's Hole Hills. Why is it called Ash Meadows? Might conjure up scenes of a burnt volcanic landscape or something of the sort. Something even like this place, perhaps. But the true reason is that it's a freaking world-class spectacular oasis, and for its relatively low elevation harbors ash trees. So our good friend Fraxinus is to be found down there. Still pretty desolate down here. At least I'm getting good exercise and good air, right? Find something eventually in flower, won't I? Tomorrow I'll be down there. In the Ash Meadows proper. How about that? Water just sitting in the desert valley bottom. That's something you don't really see that often. The Paranagit Valley, you know, that's on the edge of wetter Great Basin habitat. The Las Vegas Valley probably had some standing water at one point. Used to be an oasis. And that makes sense because the Spring Mountains are on either side of both valleys in question. Spring Mountains just up there, undoubtedly, without which there'd be no Ash Meadows. And it obviously feeds a lot of water down onto the Las Vegas side as well. But none of that really hangs out on the surface anymore. A little bit of it does, but very tiny pockets. Visit the waters some other time, either when it's a good rainfall season and or when it's a more developed growing season. It's still late winter in these parts, above 3,000 feet or so. So I know stuff is only going to be just developing or not out this year at all. Walking some desert pavements of Ash Meadows. Devil's Hole Hills still to my east. This is nonetheless a unique part of the Mojave in Nevada, in the sense that it's in the Great Basin drainage system rather than the Colorado. The system in which basically all of our previous Mojave trips have been. Yeah, I can't think of a Great Basin Mojave trip we've been on the top of my head, actually. So the waters drain into Ash Meadows or whatever other endorheic basin. Just stay there and filter into the ground from there, and don't ever reach any rivers that reach any oceans. Death Valley exemplifies that condition. We've got Telescope Peak back there. All those snows will melt down into the Badwater Basin and stay there. Keep going down. Looping around to the Johnnie Range now, a very tiny range, basically just comprised of Mount Montgomery, the northern edge of Pahrump, more or less, northwestern edge of the Spring Mountains, kind of. Things are greening up in certain places, just the shrub life. Some of the perennial herbs like Eriogonum inflatum. Some individuals greening up. But picture remains clear that it'd be time to move out of the Mojave as soon as I can in terms of field work for the season. One thing about such a barren place, basically an Atroplex plain right there. Look at Atroplex a lot more closely in the future, maybe even this trip, because those are flowering actually, one of the only things out here. But for a place so barren, it's pretty pristine on the roadsides. Not many things can successfully invade such a place from elsewhere. No European weeds on the roadsides. No Australian weeds even. No South American weeds. No weeds of other places with habitats akin to this, with droughts and aridity akin to this. So, even though it's barren and desolate, it is nice to see that it's actually quite pristine. This is something else right here. Cactus barreled all into a cluster of about 30 individuals, perhaps even more. Some have died, or are dying. Some are rising anew. There's a couple hidden in there. Look at that young one. Quite incredible. Menadora spinescens. It's a member of the olive family. Oleaceae, just like our friend Fraxinus. Shoots modified into spines. Not all the shoots, of course, just the termini of the shoots. Yeah, wouldn't want to fall on that thing. You've got distinct paired fruits. Papery on the outside. Quite different than Fraxinus fruits, wouldn't you say? Main photosynthetic organs of these puppies being the stems, of course. It's a new season's growth. Green and lush right there. It's about as green and lush as it gets for Menadora. And there's the old aged growth. Looks like most other woods. Poured a little water on it to help it recover. Look how bright green those shoots get. The presence of water. Hard to see in the glare, but verdant. It wasn't like that before the water. Something like this, or a cactus, best to press it at home, even if I had a press with me. Atriplex hymenelytra here. Press that in the fields. Extremely white and farrinose against the harsh sun. They try to remain evergreen with varying degrees of success, year by year basis, of course. Many Atriplex are dioecious. Male and female plants. This happens to be a male. Lots of open anthers here. Atriplex is really quite distinct in its broad, almost whitish leaves. They shine bright in the sunlight, that's to be certain. And this one is a female. You can see stigmas, red stigmas, rather than those opened up anthers. Atriplex is one of the only shrubs that can tolerate these very brutal desert pavements, where only kind of Coryxanthian gilia can otherwise live. So literally all that else lives here right now, and it's the old husks of the annuals. Let's get the gilia husks. Coryxanthe husks can blend in quite a bit, but they're around here. Now there's a couple with the gilias. And otherwise it's Lauria and Atriplex. And then on the borders there's a little bit more diversity, but these more open pavements are very selective. Approaching the Johnnie Range. Whether the town of Johnnie or the range was named first, I am not sure. Still very barren here in the Amargosa Desert, named after the Amargosa River, which begins in the test site in that direction. And it's one of the only rivers that flows in this region through the desert. Virgin River comes to mind as well, which flows into the Colorado, of course. Amargosa is above ground oftentimes, not always, but often, and I hear it makes a lovely walkabout. Look what we have here. Big surprise. Happy birthday. Not too happy if you're an Ambrosia dumosa attached to you. I have not seen one characteristic wet wash shrub today either. Senegalia or Chalopsis, for the like. That is how dry it is. Things are a bit lusher up here. Higher elevation now than the lower desert pavements. Not much more so though. You can see a lot of the lepidium of last year all browned out up here. So it's not like there's any annuals out, of course. But the shrubbery maintains beginning of springs up here. Beginning of spring, that is. No difference in really leaf out development from lower or higher. And there's greater density of individuals and more diversity of taxa higher up too. Still though, a very desolate spring, especially here. And a kind of cactus and Cylindra puncha R tell you that it's still very dry and very much lower Mojave habitat, even though we're going to be nearing 4,000 feet soon. A lot greener in these relatively well shaded rocks higher up. Eriogonum's fully leafed out, might be flowering soon. Got some nyctages, got maybe even some annuals greening up. Some of them might be invasive grasses. I'm not going to poke too deep in the crannies there for nothing, but it's a better situation here than in those barren pavement flats. Sphaerelsia leafing up. Ambrosia, Bahiopsis, all the familiar friends and others. Some unique stuff going on. Asteraceous shrubs that aren't common elsewhere in the Mojave and Nevada. We got a fern. How about that? Let's never see ferns along washes in the deep Mojave. This is something else. Fern was on the north facing side of the wash, so it stays sheltered in the rock pile year round. I'm sure it dies back in summer. But desert ferns, you won't really find them outside of north faces. Have to be a very well sheltered canyon indeed to be on a different aspect actually in the desert. But to find it on the bottom of the rock bed, bottom of the wash, it's pretty unreal. I mean, you don't just see them naturally occupying the talusy interface of the wash. Ambrosia very lush here. Bahiopsis, nothing flowering yet still. So a bit early, even in a wet year, I'm sure, for this elevation at least. Although you'd expect plenty of annual life in a wet year and a lot more to be flowering even with the shrubbery. So I'll keep scanning the north faces because that's the interesting habitat on this entire trip, I'd say. Desert pavements can also only sustain your interest for so long before it's just any old hike with no botanical goals. Ooh, there it is. Told ya. There's a few of them here. Gotta press at least a couple. Not only these wonderful individuals, but also, I shit you not, I think I've stumbled upon some, yeah, I'm laughing, liverworts. I'll be darned if anyone's found these here before. This is an unnamed canyon in a basically unnamed place. They're quite sheltered. They don't get hardly any sun for most of the year. And then when it's the hot time of year, I'm sure they shrivel up for the most part. That's the high point of the Johnnie Range. But based on all the cool stuff I've seen today that isn't quite mature yet, I'm gonna skip it today. South facing wash in contrast is much more desolate. A lot of green coming out in the north washes and a lot of barrenness in the south washes. Based on how barren it is, even in the washes, gonna give the Last Chance Range another chance someday. Back on the desert pavements, where you can see what I mean about being adrift in the mind, being a little bored, if you will. Bored isn't quite the right term, though. A little bit more disengaged from the landscape than what I should be, perhaps. Mind adrift, the desert pavements.